Major breaking news. The Biden administration on Friday afternoon announced another attack on the Second Amendment, this time attacking Americans' gun makers that export guns, ammunition, gun-related parts, and so on, all obviously in an attempt to thwart an industry that it appears this administration hates, except perhaps when it comes to supplying guns to the Ukraine. Let's talk about all this when we get back. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Diner, proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and author of Disarmed: What the Ukraine War Teaches Americans About the Right to Bear Arms, a lesson that the Israelis should have learned as they were not able to defend their citizens against the Hamas terrorist attack. All right, folks, breaking news. Here's the story. The United States Department of Commerce, under Joe Biden, has announced a new, what appears to be anti-gun policy against the American gun industry, specifically those companies that export guns, ammunition and gun-related parts overseas to private companies. Now, what this means, of course, is that those American companies that are competing in the global market for arms, gun parts, ammunition, and so on, they are obviously now being placed at a competitive disadvantage, which is almost certainly what the Biden administration wants. They're being placed in a competitive disadvantage to other companies that are foreign companies, companies out of Germany, Switzerland, Brazil, and so on. So specifically what this policy is that the United States Department of Commerce, which is responsible for approving the exportation of firearms and gun-related parts and ammunition. And by the way, these are not just semi-automatic or automatic weapons or semi-automatic weapons. These could be single-shot rifles. These could be shotgun shells. These could be, double-barrel shotguns, trap and skeet guns, the whole gamut. Specifically, the U.S. Department of Commerce tonight has announced that for 90 days, this is what they say, that they are pausing for approximately 90 days, that's 3 months into the new year, the issuance of new export licenses involving certain firearms, related components, and ammunition under its jurisdiction, and the provision of new export assistance activities for such products to all non-governmental end users worldwide, apart from those in certain destinations. Hear what I just said? They're banning the exportation of arms to non-governmental end users. And just to let you know mechanically how this works, and by the way, as you know, I'm not a gun industry lawyer. I don't represent FFLs. I would not be the kind of guy that you would come to for advice on any of these issues. So I'm generally familiar with what I'm about to say. But again, I don't consider myself an expert or a professional specific to these items. So for those of you that this could impact, you're going to have to seek counsel from attorneys and other professionals to do this exact kind of work, because this is not the sort of thing I do, although I'm familiar with it enough to talk about the issue and how it might hurt the Second Amendment here in the United States, which of course is my focus on this channel. So specifically, the Department of Commerce is pausing these approval of new export license for a period of 90 days, supposedly to further some United States national security or foreign policy interest, none of which, of course, is articulated or expounded upon or could even be guessed as to what they're talking about. Now, what they say is during this pause period, the Department of Commerce is going to further assess current firearm export control review policies, determine whether or not any changes are to be warranted. And again, keep in mind that they are specifically saying that if you are an American exporter exporting to governmental agencies overseas, to governmental entities overseas, foreign governments, that's totally hunky-dory. But if you're transferring arms, ammunition, or firearms-related parts and so on to non-government entities, you are on pause for 90 days, no new export approvals. Now, again, just to let you know how I believe this works, is that if you are an exporter of these items, first of all, you have to be registered with the Department of Commerce, and then you say to the Department of Commerce that I want to export this scope, or this part, or this ammunition, or this type of gun, or whatever it is, to this end user in this foreign country that presumably is a friendly country to the United States. And you say, this is the end user I'm going to export it to, and the Department of Commerce will approve your ability to do so and grant you an export license to say, yes, if you want to export 20 scopes will go ahead under this license. So what they're saying now is if you already have an export license, you can go ahead and continue under that license until you've fulfilled your obligations, let's say. But if you want to have a new license to export your items to another, again, to another for-profit entity, or I should say non-governmental entity, then you are not going to be able to do it for 90 days because we're not going to approve any new export licenses. So there's an exception here, and specifically as I read this bulletin, and I'll try to put a link to it down below and some stories from Reuters about this critical story down below. Apparently, some of the exclusions are if you are shipping to end users in the Ukraine, in Israel, or in a country in Group A1, whatever that might mean. I'm not sure what it is, but I'm sure people out there know. But specifically, the Ukraine and Israel are excluded. Then you can continue, and they will continue to issue these export license, apparently. But to all other end users, that is a no-go for 90 days. Now, what's interesting about this, and why this is clearly an attempt to hurt the American gun industry, because it's pretty clear from the Biden administration they are trying to do everything possible to hurt the Second Amendment. And as we've talked about this before, and I wrote about this in my book, First They Came for the Gun Owners, I talk about how one of the strategies of the anti-gunners, including the Biden administration, is to crack down and hurt the American gun industry in every single way possible, because that is the supplier of private firearms that we Americans buy in order to enjoy our Second Amendment protections. So again, that part of what they're trying to do here is to hurt in my opinion, is to try to hurt the bottom lines of American companies that will sell these products overseas. We know this makes no economic sense because by doing this, you're basically opening the door to foreign companies to now satisfy that demand that American companies are not able to do so, punishing, among others, as I see it, American workers that work for these American companies. But I'm sure the Biden administration has no interest in any of this. They just care about destroying the Second Amendment because it's a lot easier to bully over people that are unarmed and disarmed, and their ultimate goal is to disarm us, turning Americans from citizens into serfs or subjects or worse. Now, you're probably not going to find this shocking, but I took a look to see where on earth did this policy come from? It seemed to come out of the blue, to me at least, but no, it's not out of the blue because it looks like the typical anti-gun outlets that are pushing for this cutback on the ability of the American gun industry to sell guns overseas and actually make money like any other American industry is allowed to do. It looks like it's being pushed by your usual suspects. Specifically, on August 9th of 2023, there's an article here in Bloomberg News, and the title of this is America, Global Gun Pusher. And the article starts out with this: what you need to know. American-made semi-automatic guns are pouring into other countries at record levels, especially since U.S. policymakers agreed in 2020 to a regulatory change pushed by the firearms industry. Bloomberg investigates how, hear me? Bloomberg investigates how the federal government has become a kind of booster and concierge for gun makers exporting American gun culture and the problems it brings across the globe. Oh, you mean the Department of Commerce, the United States Department of Commerce is supposed to do anything else but promote American industry abroad? That is kind of their job, to create commerce for American industry. And there's no more important American industry than the gun industry. Because have fun having a successful military, folks, if you do not have a gun industry. Or it's even more exciting, if you think it's exciting depending upon China for our vaccinations, let's say, it's even more exciting if we have to depend upon the Chinese and the Russians for our arms that we need for our military and beyond. Of course, why would that dawn on the intellectual giants of the Biden administration? It apparently does not. So anyway, so you got Bloomberg.com, that news organization, talking about this. And of course, prior to that, you had statements made by typical anti-gun politicians. Here's an article about how a whole bunch of Democratic congressmen are calling on the Commerce Department to address troubling increase in assault weapons export approvals. So we can see the handwriting on the wall here where the anti-gunners and those that don't like the American gun industry are writing these stories. And lo and behold, on a Friday night, no less, the Biden administration announces this radical policy. Now, I hate to say this, but there is a precedent for this. And unfortunately, but this is a teaching moment for us conservatives, a teaching moment for us constitutionalists. And that is, remember I've talked about this before, that we constitutionalists do not really like, in the modern era, what I would call the law and order conservative. Now, I know that sounds odd because a lot of us consider ourselves to be law and order conservatives. In fact, in many respects, I consider myself to be a law and order conservative because I don't want violent criminals on my streets. I believe in supporting the police. I believe in helping the police as a general matter and helping them do their job as a general matter. Now, with that said, it is pretty clear that law and order conservatives are problematic in many instances when it comes to our Second Amendment rights. And I want to go back to, I think, a historical example that speaks to what the Commerce Department is doing now. That is in the year of our Lord, 1989. The year of our Lord, 1989, this is during the George H.W. Bush era. That's George Bush the first. He had a drug czar called Bill Bennett. You probably remember the drug czar, Bill Bennett, sort of that was his title. It wasn't clear what his official authority was, but as in his capacity as drug czar, he went to the ATF and literally asked them to ban the importation of certain quote-unquote assault weapons, which of course were just semi-automatic firearms. And essentially the Bush administration told the ATF to do what the drug czar Bill Bennett, the law and order conservative, although don't get him near a casino machine, but that's a different story. We won't get into those reports. But anyway, the law and order conservative Bill Bennett, the drug czar, basically caused the importation ban of a whole list of semi-automatic firearms, which as I understand it, still exists today. That ban still exists today because of a 1989 decision by the drug czar Bill Bennett, a law and order conservative under Bush the first, and what he forced effectively the ATF to go along with, which they then did. We are still living with the consequences of this. So I have a feeling that what's going on here is the Commerce Department is engaged in this 90-day pause period where they're pausing to study whether or not there should be a modification of the ability of American companies to export to non-governmental agencies or non-governmental organizations, also known as private businesses, private companies, and the like, I imagine. And we know what this study is going to say. Is there any doubt as we sit here today that the Biden administration's quote-unquote study or firearm export control review process over the next 90 days is going to give rise to? Well, I think to me, it's very little doubt that they're probably going to give rise to another 90 days of study and another 90 days of delay, and in the process try to kill the ability of American companies to make money exporting guns and gun-related weaponry and ammunition and the like and scopes and the like to private entities overseas, all in an attempt to hurt the American gun industry and their ability to provide arms, not just overseas, but most importantly, to stay in business and to innovate and create and keep producing products that Americans want to buy as we, the people, under our right to keep and bear arms. Because as you know from the Supreme Court's decision in 2008 in Heller, it is we, the people, that get to decide what arms we buy for whatever reason, as the Supreme Court said, to protect ourselves and our families, and for any and all lawful purposes. But it's pretty clear to me that the Biden administration, with this Friday night, late night, disclosure and revelation of this new anti-gun policy, at the end of the day, don't kid yourself. This is not about doing anything overseas or any foreign policy interest or any national security interest. This is about trying to destroy the American gun industry and to undercut the Second Amendment's right to keep and bear arms. But the reality is it's not going to work because as I'm giving this video, I'm wondering how many people are learning how to make their own guns as we speak. I know it's not anything I will ever be able to do or figure out, but I'm telling you, there are repercussions for when people engage in these conducts. Americans are not chess pieces. They're not chess pieces. When you change government policy, you change behavior. This is a basic thing I learned when I was trained as an economist as a very young man. You change policy, you change Americans' behaviors. I'm sure as people are watching this video and learning about this Department of Commerce announcement, behaviors are being changed. And that is something that the Biden administration, nor any administration, can control the outcome of. All right, folks, hope you learned a little bit something here today on this breaking news. Don't forget to follow me on X at 4 Boxes Diner, and we will see you again soon here at the 4 Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.